This is your brother, Brother Andre Battles, with another episode of Shame to Glory Mondays. And it's always a pleasure to be here with you. I'm grateful, truly grateful to be alive on yet another Monday. What is Shame to Glory Mondays? I want you to consider what Paul says in Romans chapter 1, verse 16. Paul says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power unto salvation to the Jew first, and then to the Greek." This is a powerful statement. This is a powerful verse. This is a powerful scripture that gives life. All right? And I'm going to share with you a very shameful story in my life. But before I do, I want you to stop and I want you to think about this for just a second. What is shame? Are you familiar with what shame is specifically in your life? I want you to stop and consider that shame is more than just a word, and it is more than just a feeling. Shame actually brings about certain results with it, and it creates certain behavior. All right? Shame does this to you. It does it to the best of us, to the worst of us. As I'm looking up a few scriptures here on my tablet, I think I found it. I believe I found the scriptures I'm looking for. Let's confirm. Yeah, we found it. Okay. Shame is more than just an emotion. Shame carries with it certain results. You know, you look at Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3. And when they sinned, after Adam and Eve took the fruit, we notice a few things took place in their life. And one of the things that took place in the life of Adam and Eve after they ate the fruit was that shame came over them. But then they did something as a result of the shame that was in their life. What does Genesis chapter 3 say? Well, Genesis chapter 3 basically says that after Adam and Eve sinned, they ran and they hid themselves. It also says in Genesis chapter 3 that they sewed fig leaves together and they covered their bodies with these fig leaves. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the shares. Thank you for the comments. Leave a comment in the comment section that says free so that I can reply to your comment. I want to share a special fellowship with you. But when they sinned, Adam and Eve, shame came over them, guilt came over them, sorrow came over them. And as a result, they hid themselves, and then they sewed fig leaves together to cover their nakedness, because for the first time, they recognized that they were naked. I want you to stop and think about anything that you've ever done that caused shame in your life. Think about it for just a moment. And ask yourself, if you didn't repeat the same thing that Adam and Eve did you not run and hide? Did you not try to cover yourself? The answer is yes. I'm sure you did. I know you did. And as a result of you running and hiding, as a result of you trying to cover up your shame, you found yourself living a lie. Adam and Eve were trying to live a lie when they sewed fig leaves and put it over themselves to cover their nakedness. The lie was that they weren't feeling a sensation that they had never felt before, nakedness. And we know it's a lie because as soon as they experienced it, they covered themselves. But yet they knew it wasn't an adequate enough cover up, so they hid themselves and they remained hidden until Jesus comes in the garden in Genesis chapter 3, and he asked a question that on the surface looks a little silly. Where are you? That's like a parent who knows where their child's favorite hiding spot is, walking around the house pretending as if they don't know where that child is, and then saying, "Where are you, little Johnny? Where are you, Christopher? You know where that little boy is." And God knew where they were. But he didn't ask them where they were because he needed to know and to locate their location. God asked them where they were simply because God was offering them an opportunity to tell the truth. He was giving them an opportunity to confess. And I want us to stop and consider this. When shame comes into our life, when shame comes into our experience as a result of our disobedience, then automatically what ends up happening is that we run, we hide, and then we cover up. And that is what we're learning from Adam and Eve's experience in Genesis 3 when they covered themselves with fig leaves. They wanted to cover their shame. And it's the exact same thing that we do when we sin, when we step outside of the bounds, when we do wrong, when we lie, cheat, steal, smoke, drink, step outside of our marriage and have an affair, when we have an intimate relationship with someone we're not married to, when we have same gender relationships, whenever we sin and we know that we've sinned, shame automatically comes in to the picture. Automatically. I mean, immediately too. It doesn't take time. Romans chapter 1 verse 16 tells us that we ought not to be ashamed. Why? Because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then Paul says in Romans 1:16 that the gospel of Jesus Christ is the power unto salvation. The gospel of Jesus Christ. What is the gospel? It's the good news that Jesus died on the cross so that you and I could be forgiven for every shameful thing we've ever done. And the fact that Jesus died on the cross is the power that needs to come into the life to omit the shame, to wipe clean the shame, to do away with it. Not hiding like Adam and Eve did in Genesis 3, not covering up your shame and your nakedness like Adam and Eve did in Genesis chapter 3. And we need to understand this, because I don't know how many times I've masturbated, how many times I've stepped out of my first marriage and cheated, how many times I've smoked pot, how many times I've lied. And then the natural response, the response of a sinful person who is feeling shame and regret, is for me to cover it up. And normally we cover it up with a lie. In other situations, we may try to cover it up with self-righteous behavior. In other situations or scenarios, we try to cover up our shame with religious activity. You know, going to church, signing up for the choir, doing outreach and ministry projects in the community or with the church. And none of these things are wrong. Now, don't get me twisted. Don't get it twisted. Doing outreach and ministry projects, and these things are actually things we ought to do. But the problem is that we do these things thinking that these things are going to bring a relief from our shame. When Paul says in Romans chapter 1 verse 16 that the only thing that can bring relief from your shame is the gospel of Jesus Christ. A knowledge, but not just a knowledge like a head knowledge. Oh, I know Jesus died on the cross. No, not that kind of knowledge. A working knowledge in your life where you yourself have ran and hid yourself and tried to cover up your shame with behaviors, and then having to come to a knowledge of the good news of the cross, the blood of Jesus Christ, having cleansed you, pardoned you, forgiven you, and you coming to an awareness of that in your own personal life. See, a head knowledge and a book knowledge, a theological knowledge is not going to help you. Knowledge in and of itself is nothing without a first-hand experience of that knowledge being real in your life. And this is where you having an experience with Christ and knowing for yourself from personal experience what the cross will do for you, has done for you, can do for you, is going to actually make a difference in your life. Paul says that he is not ashamed for and of the gospel. I say for the gospel and of the gospel because you have to consider that once you understand what the gospel of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection has afforded you, then there's nothing that you've ever done in your past life that could make you feel shame. I remember the year was 2018, and I slept with a young lady that was a devil worshiper. And in one particular episode where demons were manifesting themselves through this young lady, it was myself and another brother that were able, through the power and the Spirit of God, to cast demons out of this woman. When it happened, when we were able to, through the strength and power of God, to cast these demons out of her, it was only because I was walking in obedience to God at the time. I was living a surrendered life. I was grateful for the cross of Christ and Him crucified for my sins. About 6 months after we cast these demons out of this young lady, I ended up backsliding in my walk with God. I started smoking marijuana again. I started snorting cocaine once more. And I remember that the old Andre came back. The old Andre that was put to death on the cross with Christ once I had repented of my sins. The old Andre that Christ put to death with him. The old Andre that the blood of Christ cleansed me from. It came back. And not because it was strong, not because it had resurrection power, but the old Andre came back because Andre decided to go back to those old habits. And 6 months after we were able, by the grace of God, to cast these demons out, myself and another friend, we were able to cast these demons out of a young lady. I resurrected the old life. And this young lady came back into my life, found me on Facebook, messaged me, and we started flirting with each other. And I remember the conversations got sexually charged. She lived 3 hours away from me. And based on a few plans my ex-wife and I had made during the time that this young lady reached out to me, well, I found myself with my ex-wife and my 2 daughters in the very place where this young lady was located. While my ex-wife and daughters were fellowshipping and spending time with my former sister-in-law, me and this young lady ended up having sexual intercourse with each other. I remember we smoked 2 blunts before we laid in bed together. And remember, this is the lady who 6 months before, as I was under the power and the Spirit of Christ, as me and another brother were able to cast the demons out of this woman because she was a devil worshiper who was trying to come to God. 6 months later, I had walked away from God. And I remember that as I walked away from God, this young lady came back into my life. And she no longer trying to walk with God. She had went back to her devil worshiping ways. And when I say devil worshiping, I mean literally, she was a devil worshiper. And we ended up having sex on her couch in Dallas, Texas, when I was supposed to be visiting family with my ex-wife at the time and my children. I escaped my ex-wife and daughters and went to this young lady's place, her apartment, and we laid down together on her couch and had sex. I was a married man, and at the time, I was a called Christian. I called myself a Christian, but I wasn't living like one. I was even at the time preaching and teaching on social media. The year was 2018, but I was in a backslidden, reprobate state where I wasn't living correctly. If the story were to end there, then my brother, my sister who's listening to this message, then you would perhaps be discouraged because you perhaps have an experience in your life that has brought you shame, much like this shameful experience that I'm sharing with you now with this young lady who was a devil worshiper. Literally, she worshiped devils. She would communicate with demons, and yet me as a Christian at the time, I had the gall, the audacity, and the nerve to have sex with this woman. And I was married at the time as well. No sooner did we end up finished with our sexual encounter, did the guilt and the shame that hit Adam and Eve in Genesis 3 hit me. And I felt great grief and sorrow. And I remember carrying that lie with me because I had to lie to my ex-wife at the time so that I can skip away from where she was till I could get to where this young lady was and have sex with her. And that shame and that guilt that I covered up with that lie, it affected me emotionally, spiritually, and mentally for a very long time. I want you to know that shame and guilt are sensations that Satan uses against us to bring grief into our life. I want you to know that shame and grief and guilt are sensations, are emotions, are strongholds that Satan uses to bring pain, misery, separation, stress, and anger into our lives. I remember once I did what I did, and after the sex was done, I remember, and after I left, that I was sworn between myself and myself that I would never tell my ex-wife that I had slept with this woman. I had sworn to myself because I knew that if I said anything, that my marriage would have ended. I knew that for a fact because this was not the first time I had cheated. And that only made the shame and the regret even worse. And so for about a year, I kept this secret to myself. Again, Genesis 3, you notice that Adam and Eve sinned, and they didn't come out and tell the truth so that they could restore themselves back to God through the truth of what they had done. Instead, they ran and hid themselves. Then they covered up their nakedness that they had now experienced as a result of their sin with fig leaves. They didn't know they were naked. The Bible says in Genesis 2 that they were naked, but they didn't know it. There's something about this sin that they had committed that now opened up their eyes. It opened up their understanding. And they now knew that they were naked. And just like Adam and Eve knew that they were naked and they tried to cover their nakedness with fig leaves as a result of their sin, when I had sex with this woman who was at the time a devil worshiper, someone who spoke to spirits, she was a medium. I was a Christian and a pastor that worked on social media ministry at the time. The year was 2018, much like how I'm doing social media ministry now. The only difference is that back then I was not surrendered to God. I was living two lives. And after I had sex with this woman, after we smoked two blunts and then had sex on her couch in her apartment building, while I was visiting with family in the Dallas, Texas area with my ex-wife and two children, grief and shame and guilt came over me. And all I knew to do was hide it through a lie. And I lied to my ex-wife, who at the time had already been privy to a few affairs that I had committed against her before. And she would always know whenever I had done something. So she would ask certain questions. And one of the questions that she would ask me was, Andre, have you had sex with another woman? Because a man, there's certain guilt that we live under, and it shows itself in a marriage. Our wives typically will know when we have cheated. And my ex-wife knew. So she would ask, but then I would lie. I would say, no, I didn't have sex with anyone. I promise. I would even put my hand on the Bible and swear that I had not had sex with another woman. But I was lying, and I was covering up my shame with a lie. My question for you as you hear my story, and for those of you that are popping in right now and would like to hear the rest of the story, just give the YouTube algorithm a few moments after the live is complete to upload the full message so that you can go back to the beginning and listen to the message. You have hid yourself behind a lie. And I don't know what it is you've been doing. You may have hid yourself behind smoking weed, thinking that was going to bring peace to your mind. You may have hid yourself behind the bottle. You may have hid yourself behind more of the same behavior that you've done, thinking that somehow, some way, somehow, it would produce peace of mind in your life after you've done what you've done. But you know full well that it hasn't, and you are right now in a place of great shame and guilt. Today is Shame to Glory Monday. And although your shame, it feels as thick as the darkest night, I want to encourage you to know that Romans chapter 1, verse 16 says that you no longer need to be ashamed. Why? Because the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is the power unto salvation for you. See, Jesus doesn't care what you did. Jesus doesn't care how many times you've cheated. Jesus doesn't care how many blunts you've smoked, how many bottles you've drunk and consumed. Jesus doesn't care about how many times you've stepped out of your marriage and cheated on your spouse. Jesus doesn't care. When I say doesn't care, I'm not saying that it does not affect him in that it hurts him. Yes, of course it does. But you thought that because you hurt the Lord with your sinful nature and then sinful behavior, that you might as well just stay away from him. And that was the lie that the devil sold you, that you purchased. And that because now you've purchased this lie, you think that the only thing you can do, like Adam and Eve, is stay hidden from God, thinking that you're condemned and that you are destined to live the same life you've been living. But I'm here to tell you that that's not the truth. What do you need to do to clear the way? Again, in Genesis 3, Jesus comes into the Garden of Eden asking Adam and Eve, where are you? And he asked this question so that they would tell the truth. Listen, listen, listen. Psalms 32, verses 3 through 5. This is David speaking after he killed Uriah, because he got Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, pregnant. And he couldn't get Uriah to co-sign the pregnancy by encouraging Uriah to go home and sleep with his wife. So he killed Uriah. But what does David say in Psalms 32, verses 3 through 5? When I kept silence about my sin, my bones waxed old. For day and night the hand of the Lord was heavy upon me. And so then I acknowledged my sin unto thee, and thou forgave me the iniquity or my sin. The answer to clear the way of the guilt in your life is to confess what you have done and tell the truth. And that might involve you having to confess what you've done to certain individuals, not just God. And you may sit here now listening to me thinking that that's an impossibility. I can't tell my wife I cheated and had sex with her cousin. I can't tell my husband I cheated and had sex with my boss. How could I go back and tell my boss that I stole that money? How could I go back to my child and tell my child something that I did? How could I go back to a friend and tell that friend something that I did and that I lied about? John 15:5 says you can do nothing without Jesus Christ. And for this reason, Paul is telling us in Romans 1:16 that we ought not to any longer be ashamed of what needs to be done. Why? Because Christ has done it already for us. He died on the cross for us. He made a way for the Spirit of God to come into our lives to inspire us with the energy and the power to live out the truth. In fact, it is Jesus Christ who we invite in our hearts, and He will live the truth out inside of us. He will be the one to go to your spouse. You will feel a power coming into you. When? I don't know. How? I don't know. And all of a sudden, you will feel an inclination to tell that person you lied to the truth. All of a sudden, you'll feel an inclination to go to God in prayer and tell God, like David did in Psalms chapter 32, verses 3 and 5, the truth about what you've done, which has kept you away from God. And you will feel a peace come over you because God will not treat you the way you deserve to be treated. It is for this reason Paul is not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because the cross of Christ, where His blood was shed for you and I, the cross of Christ, where the old nature was put to death with Christ, has dealt with our sin problem. And this is reason for rejoice. I want you to jump in the comment section and type free. And I will reply with my cell phone number. I will also reply with some scriptures that will help you on your journey against the sin problem in your life, and that will open up your eyes to the reality that you no longer need to feel shame, and you no longer need to let shame control you. You don't need to let shame make you run and hide like it made Adam and Eve hide, because Jesus is coming looking for you now. And He is looking for you now through my voice as I've shared this message with you, that you don't need to be ashamed. I slept with a woman that used to speak to demons and devils while I was married to my ex-wife. And it brought great shame to me. But once I found out about the grace and the mercy of Christ, once I found out about the gospel message of Christ dying on the cross to cleanse me and forgive me of the very sin of me sleeping with a woman who worshiped demons and while being married, that truth set me free from guilt, and it set me free from shame. And I'm sharing this message with you so that you can be set free from the shame and guilt that has been carrying you and burdening you and burying you. My name is Andre Battles. Jump in the comment section and type free. Hit the share button, and I'll see you soon.